as long as the gaming industry has been around, smaller and lesser known minds have been in the shadows of big AAA developers creating their own worlds. While we have big names like Nintendo and developers they work with like the Pokemon Company and Monolith Soft, Sony with studios like Insomniac and Naughty Dog, and Microsoft with Bethesda and Obsidian Studios. In the background, there are indie developers that create such imaginative universes that push boundaries that some AAA studios aren't tapping into. Hello everyone, my name is Vegero and this is Cozy Veggie, and on this channel we cover a variety of things such as video essays, reviews, JRPGs, and all things cozy gaming. Indie game developers are essential to the gaming industry because they bring in innovation, creativity, and diversity to the medium. They enrich the gaming landscape by pushing boundaries, creating unique gaming experiences, and nurturing talent. Their contributions have a long-lasting impact to the gaming industry as a whole, making them a vital and valued aspect to the gaming ecosystem. I think it's important that we shed a light to the creative minds behind the indie games that have come out not only in the past few decades, but throughout the years that the gaming industry has been around. Whether they be a one-man show or a ragtag group of friends who want to share their creative project to the rest of the world to enjoy, today I want to shed a light and stress the importance of indie game developers and how they are a huge impact and are important and essential parts to the gaming industry. In my eyes, I think indie developers are definitely thinking outside the box when it comes to coming up with new gaming ideas. Indie developers are often have the freedom to experiment with unique and innovative gaming concepts that may not fit the traditional mold of big budget games. This creativity leads to the development of new gameplay mechanics, art styles, and storytelling approaches, which can inspire and influence the entire industry. We have games like Oxenfree with Night School Studios, which is known for its atmospheric and suspenseful storytelling, as well as its striking hand-painted visuals and haunting soundtrack. It combines elements of horror, mystery, and character-driven drama to create a memorable and immersive gaming experience. Celeste, which is a critically acclaimed indie title that presented a new spin on your traditional 2D platformer, with its engaging narrative-driven story of self-discovery, has impacted many players today. There's also Hades, which is a hack-and-slash roguelike with an addicting gameplay loop and captivating story that has won over many gamers. The imagination and individuality of these games can only really come from indie developers because they have more freedom and liberty to create these type of games. Honestly, I think that indie games I want to see are kind of influencing AAA games today. Whether those indie games or indie game developers are actually like influenced by obviously bigger games, they'd have definitely made lasting impacts in what the games are being put out today. For example, Stardew Valley, which yes, it was influenced by Harvest Moon, obviously, and I'm pretty sure the director or the creator behind Stardew Valley said that he was inspired by Harvest Moon. But it's really interesting that Stardew Valley, which is essentially a slice of life farming sim, has honestly been the catalyst of what we see today with the amount of farming sims that are coming out. I mean, I think this past month alone, which is the filming of this video, September, I think we've had a total of 3 to 4 farming sims in just 1 month of a whole year. I know this past year we've had a lot more, but just in 1 month alone, 3 farming sims are out, and there's still plenty more to come out in the following year. That just goes to show that that small game that from that one man made this huge renaissance of farming sims. And then you have Riot Games, and they're well known for, League of Legends. They're also tapping into the whole farming sim cozy gaming world by creating Bandle Tales, which are the League of Legends with Bandle Tales. It is really interesting. I don't think 5 years ago you would have thought, yeah, League of Legends would definitely make a game about farmings and just a live sim and cozy game, because I would not believe you. I'd probably laugh at your face. You even have games like Harvestella that came out last year from Square Enix, which is kind of the spin-off of like the Rune Factory series, where it has a lot heavily focuses on RPG elements, but also has obviously farming as a main aspect to it as well, which is really interesting, and I've again heard really great things about it. So overall, I feel like you definitely see a lot of more indie game developers are pushing the envelope when it comes to other creators, whether they be other indie game creators or even big companies wanting to tap into what they're doing because there is a market for it and people are actually enjoying these type of games. Indie developers are more willing to take risks and explore unconventional ideas because they often have smaller budgets and are less constrained by commercial pressures. This willingness to take risks can lead to breakthroughs in game design and storytelling. Hollow Knight is a great example of a studio who wanted to take a chance by creating a challenging platformer with a chilling backdrop and story that till this day many gamers have credited as one of the better indie titles to date. Stray, which is a game that came out in the summer of 2022, is a beautiful game where players take on the role of a lost and lonely cat in a futuristic, neon-lit city filled with robots. The game is played from a third-person perspective and you navigate the city's winding alleys, rooftops, and streets as a cat. This game may seem like it might not sell well in the perspective of a big developer, but it ended up being a nominee for the Game Awards in 2022. By taking a risk, these developers bring in new ideas of what gaming can and should look like. I think for me, I don't know if this is for everyone else, but this is my opinion, but I honestly think that like AAA games can honestly be a little bit formulaic, especially with long-running series. A great example would be Final Fantasy. Recently, this past summer in June, the 16th entry of the franchise came out, and there was a lot of discourse about that game, whether it was a true Final Fantasy, whether the combat was too drastic and different from old-time fans. Some people even enjoyed the new combat because it was more refreshing take. Overall, the whole discourse was that a lot of people kind of complained. Not me calling out people. I would say rightfully so with some of the critiques about the game, but I think the reason why it did what it did, well, the reason why a lot of people, the developers and the team who created that game, which is Creative Business Unit 3, wanted to take that route is because, again, Final Fantasy has been around for so long, and it wouldn't make sense for them to keep doing the same thing over and over again, because then it'd become redundant and repetitive, and people would get bored and it'd get stale. I think a great example of sometimes series being a little too stale and kind of repetitive is Pokemon. A lot of people have dropped off the franchise because it's kind of the same thing over and over again, rinse and repeat. And of course, the Pokemon noticed that those people were having those kind of complaints and decided to, let's spice things up. And we have games like Pokemon Arceus, Legends Arceus, or the more recent Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which definitely stays true to its original form of what Pokemon is, but it also adds a new flavor and spins to it, which I think is really cool, especially with Pokemon Legend Arceus, where it's more of an open world aspect to it. I think when developers, or especially when AAA developers, are so caught up with keeping it as it is, or kind of appeasing to the fans to some extent, it kind of pigeonholes them to not being able to explore new ideas or explore different types of gameplay mechanics. And at the end of the day, I think it's honestly a great experience for all the developers and the fans to, being able to experience a new take on a beloved franchise. And I feel like with indie game developers, they don't have that kind of expectation to be a certain way because no one knows what to expect from an indie game developer. And they have that freedom to pretty much do as they please, to just create whatever they want, which is honestly a really freeing thing. Indie games offer diverse ranges of experience that cater to a wide variety of tastes and preferences. Unlike many large studios that focus on blockbuster titles, indie developers often create niche or experimental games that fill gaps in the market and provide players with fresh, unconventional gaming experiences. To be honest, whenever I watch indie showcases or events, that titles that get announced are probably the most crazy, out-of-pocket, and unhinged game that only a person who really loves games can come up with. Not saying that's a bad thing, only a creative mind can come up with these kind of games. Games like Dungeon Munchies, which is a side-scrolling action RPG with focus on hunting down creatures, cooking them, and eating dishes to gain certain abilities. I can only imagine that the creators were high while watching a scary movie and thought, damn, those zombies look pretty tasty. But those crazy and outlandish ideas are what make people look forward when playing indie games. I think to me, AAA games are like the big blockbusters in movies. When I think of big blockbusters, you think of like Marvel or your Steven Spielberg's or like your Bong Joon-ho kind of type of films. And then indie games are like indie films, like your Everything Everywhere All at Once's or your Bottoms or stuff of that nature. I think it's really cool when indie games are very much niche have its own audience, but also taps into an audience that the bigger picture, the bigger companies wouldn't take the time to look at, which I think is really awesome to think about. It gives an opportunity to talk about and discuss on things that normal or mainstream audiences wouldn't probably, or mainstream companies wouldn't really think about. Indie games tend to be more accessible in terms of price and hardware requirements. This accessibility allows for a broader audience, including gamers with limited resources or less powerful gaming setups to enjoy gaming. Indie game developers also often tackle important social and cultural issues, promoting inclusivity and diversity in the medium. Indie games have been the forefront for catering and creating games that allow a wide demographic to play them. In the article by The Wired, the developers of Coromon talk about how they create a game to cater to a wider audience, especially to those who are not able-bodied. Regardless of your preferred platform, players can activate features that reduce flashes and use colorblind modes to make their experience more accessible. While writing the script of this video, I stumbled upon the game The Veil: Shadow of the Crown, and with this game, they take into account those who are blind. In this game, the only visuals you get is the start menu. However, the rest of the game relies heavily on auditory elements to help players into the really immersive and unique adventure.
The king is dead. It was not a hero's death. It was the slow death of an old man. But it gave him time to plot and fuss about his affairs. Enough time, in fact, to spare a rare thought towards his second-born.
I think when it comes to games, I think I fall victim into this, and I don't really consider people who are not able-bodied like I am, because I don't know, you don't really think about that often. And having games like Coromon that allows people who are blind to be able to take in part and play these kind of games and adventures is honestly a beautiful thing to see. I think we should, when it comes to gaming, all bodies should be considered when playing these games, and that means disabled bodies as well. And I feel like indie games are definitely pushing the forefront and pushing AAA companies to incorporate those kind of features as well. I think there's a great example of The Last of Us, where they actually worked with disabled gamers to help make their the game more accessible, as well as Ratchet and Clank, which had certain button controls that made it more accessible. And of course, we have Xbox and PlayStation who are making controllers for people who may not have the accessibility like an able-bodied person like myself would. And these are definitely good things when both indie games and AAA companies pushing for all bodies to be able to play their games, which I think is really important. Indie games often explore artistic and narrative themes that go beyond mainstream commercial interests. This artistic expression adds depth and cultural significance to the medium, elevating games to an art form. In the cooking game Venba, you take on the role of an Indian mother who immigrated to Canada in the 1980s with her family. In this narrative about family, love, grief, and other topics, players will prepare various foods and revive forgotten recipes, engage in branching discussions, and explore. In Season, A Letter to the Future, which tells the narrative of Estelle, a young lady who ventures out of a remote home for the first time in order to document the world for future generations before an unknown catastrophe destroys everything. Indie games can also teach us so much of other cultures and places we may not have the opportunity to. With stunning pixel art and a story about overcoming anxiety, despair, as well as love between a boy and a girl with supernatural abilities, A Space for the Unbound is a slice-of-life adventure game set in the late 1990s in rural Indonesia. I definitely do think that with indie games, I think you definitely see a lot more representation. Not saying that AAA games don't do that, and they're definitely working better at doing that, but I feel like indie game developers have definitely will take the risk to talk about issues, matters, and people of all aspects of life, which is honestly important and really cool and necessary. It's 2023. Our games, I think, personally, in my opinion, should represent also the world as well. And I get it. It's an escape to fantasy. I want it to be just its own thing. But sometimes if you're going to go there and talk about issues that are happening to us in real time, or just issues that matter and impact us daily, it's important to do your due diligence and make sure that it's, like, you know what, somewhat accurate. Also, and just in general, sometimes I don't always want to play as like a white man saving the world, because that's literally almost every other game. But you know, not that saying that it's a bad thing, but like For me especially as a Black woman, it's always honestly such a great thing and really cool to see a Black woman kicking ass or going through life and learning more about herself, or just not just Black women, or just being someone who's part of the LGBTQ community. I think it's super duper important that we touch on issues and touch on groups that should be also represented in media. And it's really not that big of a deal. And if you do have a problem about it, like that one guy about the whole pronoun situation with Starfield, that man needs help, he needs therapy. But besides that, that's not what I'm trying to talk about. What I'm trying to say is that representation definitely does matter. And I feel like indie game developers are definitely pushing for that as well. Many indie developers start small and grow into successful studios. They serve as home for talent, allowing aspiring game designers, artists, programmers, and other industry professionals to gain experience and recognition. Some of today's most well-known game developers and studios began as indie projects. Studios such as Larian, who were known for the Divinity series, and more recently with major hype and love for the Baldur's Gate 3. Supergiant Games, who have the powerhouses like Bastion, Transitor, Pyre, and probably the most well-known with Hades. These games have garnered so much love and notoriety over the years that people can't wait to see what they have next. Like indie games at this point in time have honestly reached a level of recognition and notoriety of some big AAA companies as well. Like for me as a cozy gamer, I am so excited for when Haunted Chocolatier comes out, which is clear from the developer Concerned Ape, who made, of course, the very well-known, coveted Stardew Valley. I remember when that trailer dropped and it was trending on Twitter. Everyone was losing their minds because this is a second game coming from Concerned Ape, which is really exciting because the love and community behind Stardew Valley is so massive, and to know that there's going to be a second game under the same creator, there's a lot of hype and a lot of expectations coming to that game, which I think is really cool. And you have also games like Shovel Knight, which has become a very well-known and beloved indie game that started off as a small Kickstarter and is now pretty much on almost every platform known to man and has a really huge following. Indie developers often have close interactions with their communities, taking player feedback into account and fostering a sense of community around their games. This engagement can lead to dedicated fan bases and word-of-mouth marketing. You can see this a lot, especially when indie devs are in the early development stages of creating a game. I think it's so important to take into community engagement into consideration, especially when indie game developers. I think indie game studios are really good at communicating with their fans and being really transparent about what's going on with their games, especially, again, in the early stages of their game, whether that's be beta tests or alpha or giving out keys to do review codes of their games. Having that kind of in trust and building that relationship with their consumer and the studio is super important, especially with indie games, because they really need to have boost and get that hype going in order to make sure that their game is successful. And regardless if they were an indie game or a smaller studio, I think it's really nice that they take that time to really talk with content creators, even to talk about streams or interviewing and talking and discussing about their game and why people should play them. And honestly, talking and getting engaged with the consumer and also content creators allows and brings in more exposure. I mean, I will gladly talk about any type of indie game, regardless if the studio reached out to me or not, just because, one, if the game is awesome, I want to, of course, support it, and two, I want to support smaller businesses and smaller companies as well, because in this world, I think it's important that we shed light to these really creative, awesome games, because these are small teams and it's a lot of work. Like, creating a game is not easy, and I think we should be able to give their flowers too. Now, of course, I can always be singing its praises, because indie games and devs do have cons as well. Indie developers typically operate with smaller budgets compared to larger game studios. It's just the way that it is. This limitation can affect quality, scope, and scale of their games. They may struggle with financing, marketing, and distribution. Smaller teams may lack the manpower and expertise needed to tackle complex projects, leading to longer development times and potential technical issues. Also, we gotta keep in mind, making a game is not cheap. The financial success of indie games can be unpredictable. Many indie developers face the risk of not recouping their investment or generating a sustainable income from their work. At the end of the day, they're taking a chance, and if it doesn't work, that's a huge setback financially. Also, with limited resources, indie developers may struggle to maintain the same level of quality assurance as larger studios. This can result in issues such as bugs, glitches, which can affect the player experience. Indie developers may not have the same level of industry connections and relationships as established studios. This can make it more challenging to secure partnerships, collaborations, or access to valuable resources. And in the year 2023, the indie game market is highly competitive. With thousands of new games released each year, it can be challenging for indie developers to get their games noticed amidst the noise of other titles. It can be really difficult to showcase what makes you different from other titles and why players should even pick up your game when they can just play 10 others who offer the same experience. And of course, indie developers may lack access to the latest technology, tools, and hardware, which can affect technical performance and visual quality of their games. Despite these challenges, many indie developers find creative ways to overcome them and produce successful and innovative games. While the road may be difficult, the passion, dedication, and talent of indie developers continue to make important contributions to the gaming industry. Indie game developers are critical to gaming businesses because they provide innovation, diversity, and creativity to the medium. They contribute to the gaming scene by pushing the envelope, delivering innovative gaming experiences, and developing talent. Their efforts have a long-term impact on the industry, making them an important and valuable part to the gaming world. The reason why I wanted to talk about this topic overall is because indie game developers they really are important to the gaming industry. I think that this past couple of years, we've seen a wide variety of indie games really pushing out really amazing content and honestly pushing AAA developers honestly to do better, because if an indie game with a small team who have great awesome ideas, then you should be able to do that too. And I think that's so important. Having this kind of competition is a healthy way of competition and important, because at the end of the day, us gamers, we're winning if both indie game developers are putting out really good content and putting out really good games, as well as AAA as well. If you guys enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Also comment down below what's your favorite indie game title. And thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good one. Bye!